Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about what Ory is and why are we an open source company. And I think it's important as you go through the day to consider, come on in and have a seat. Plenty of chairs up front here, don't be shy. What we're talking about today is not only open source, but also why we do it, and in particular, why it makes Ory a very special company. So I want to talk a little bit about that and start off with some personal stories because, as probably most of you know, it's the people that make software. It's not open source itself. It's not anything else but a passion for building stuff together with other people. So early days, I see one person in the room that probably knows this poster. That's Paul Wall here. He's very involved in Unix. At the time, Unix, of course, was one of the operating systems that ushered in a whole era of building open source software. And in particular, my personal experience was taking something called Revision Control System, which at the time was the sort of Git equivalent in Unix, and porting that to Windows. It was a Hercules project. It was not open source in the way we talk about open source today, but it was licensed through the GNU Foundation, and as all of you probably know, the GNU Foundation was one of the premier places where open source began, and let's say I got a fever. It hit me that this was a very important way of developing software with the owners, the creators of the software system, by the way, a professor in Karlsruhe, and helped us a lot develop this software and bring it. This was 1986. Another era of open source started around the year 2000, 2005, when much bigger projects addressing internet infrastructure began. In particular, at the time, the whole IP stack, which was driven by companies like Cisco, was invisible to a lot of the proprietors in the internet, in particular telecom companies. And one of the frustrations, by the way, that Google had at the time and Deutsche Telekom had at the time was understanding how the traffic flow worked in this IP stack without having access to the source code. So as you can imagine, this was very, very difficult to optimize not only economics, but also the performance of a network if you don't see what the software is doing. So as we built the software, a whole era of software-defined networking was happening, and basically Google, Deutsche Telekom, and a number of other companies decided to start something called OpenFlow, which was a major infrastructural software effort that I think is fair to say changed a lot about how traffic flows over the broader internet today. The next era for me was a personal defeat in some sense, but it was an interesting one. I started looking at this software platform as a service around 2013 because it was interesting and because at the time I had spent about 5 years working as an executive and was a little bit out of software development. So I decided, why not go and try to get my hands dirty, again, with some software development and some real coding. And let's just say there was a team of 10 people, Aeneas was also involved in this. And the work ethic and the pace, the cadence of work was so fast that it was just amazing for me how these people were creating a software this complex at the speed they were doing it. I think it's fair to say I got my teeth kicked in. I couldn't really do much in terms of adding value to it, but it did show me yet another thing of massive collaboration on the internet and how tools like Go, programming language, GitHub, and of course communication today, Slack, then ICQ, so built on real-time communication infrastructure. These things are now shaping, all of these ingredients go into what we're doing at Ory today. And building the cloud security, one, we decided at an early stage, around 2015, that building software for ourselves was actually defeating the purpose of implementing broader standards and especially open source standards in the internet. So we looked at cloud, and Aeneas and I were working at the time on another product, and we decided this whole area of authentication, authorization seems very, very challenging. We wanted to develop, with a simple goal, develop something that other Go programmers, Go, by the way, is also an open source project by Google. That's the whole programming language. How can we implement something that would enable cloud security as a library in this language? And that was sort of the reason that Ory got started. And then, of course, more and more as we grew in popularity, we got information from other developers about why don't we do an API security layer, why don't we do permission and the whole access control language, why don't we also just tackle identity? The original idea was to make things as open as possible, and all of these tools that Ory developed are functionally designed to be independent products and work in concert, but work also in one functional area. So why open source? Open source is part of not only our background, but it's also a way, a model of creating software, probably the most modern creation system for software that exists today, alongside of the methodology and the ability to get new ideas into software. It's open source is a bigger way of developing software than any one company has today. If you look at sort of the history of some of the bigger open source projects, for instance in Linux, initially open source wasn't even about adding source code. Open source was about getting ideas from other people to make changes to the code. And over the time, I think especially interesting in the Linux project, they started off with the ideas, and then it became obvious that people were able to create things and contribute things in a much better way. So people creators matter a lot. Now, today there's a lot of tools, especially with AI coming up, that are being used to augment open source projects and help companies and people make changes to software. Of course, open source also introduces a lot of other things that could be treated as potential security problems, but there's also broader scanning software now available that's also open source that checks the background of software code and makes sure that the people that are creating it are also working in an ethical way, and that's very important. Now, Ory in particular has developed, I think, its own core values over the years, and these core values drive a lot of what we how we operate and how we think. The first one is really to create a sustainable ecosystem that not only sustains itself, but also creates for each individual contributor and participant more value than the input. So the output is bigger than the input, and the sustainability is very important so that this ecosystem grows over time, but also that people get their own ability to extract value for them out of this ecosystem. So that's very important. Fairness is another core value that Ory has. In other words, everyone in the community can make a contribution. Granted, it's not as easy as it was in 2015. There's more code, there's more documentation, but everyone can make a contribution. No one is excluded, and we're very proud of the fact that we have a broad range of people and participants from really not only across the globe, many different kinds of developers and contributors. Ory also wants to be a kind ecosystem and a kind company. In other words, we want to help you. Teaching is as important as sharing when it comes to open source, and I think it's very, very obvious to us that most of the community, in fact, benefits from more teaching than they do from sharing. In other words, people come to us every day on Slack, thousands of people that want to know something about their product, their project, what they're building. A lot of these people, by the way, ask us questions about products that are not Ory products. There are other open source products like Docker as an example. In other words, Ory tries to be helpful as much as it can and kind to the people in the community, and that's not only in the community of open source developers, that of course applies to all of our customers across the board. Last but not least, Ory strives to be excellent, and when I say excellent, I think there's, in all of these projects I've seen over the years, a large focus on delivery. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but delivering things is important, but delivering things top-notch, excellent, tested not only by the developers, but by a larger community, peer-reviewed, best in class, using standards that matter to most of the people in the community. Ory stands for excellence not only in building software, but in building the community itself and being an excellent company with excellent people. So I think these are the things that really are the core values that drive us. Building infrastructure for the digital world, as I just mentioned in other projects, is in our background, but let's face it, it's not easy. No one really understands how the internet works with all the different software products out there today, but we're threatened by many things across the globe, including not only massive security threats, but also just the breakdown of the internet itself. Understanding and redeveloping the software that we use every day, not only in this room, but across the globe, is very important to the origin of what Ory wants to achieve. In other words, this is just not another application company. This is building something that's the fabric of the internet as we know it. In order to do that, we're going to need a bigger community, a bigger ecosystem, more people helping us. We need customers that also understand what we do and are willing to pay for it, but we also need customers that are willing to contribute more of their know-how, more of their experience to the bigger Ory ecosystem so that we can, in fact, shape the future of security and infrastructure in the internet. Of course, a lot of you will know that we're building tools for developers. That's our primary focus. That doesn't mean we do not have value and add value for others, but our audience today, and I think will be for the near future, is really people like us that are building infrastructure software that helps drive the new security models in cloud and the internet. In order to do that, we have about 250 open source repositories. We build advanced tools for not only programmers, command line interface products. We build tools that are easy to use when you deploy other software products in the internet. And this makes Ory, I think, an extremely valuable part of a lot of developer projects because of our focus on that. It also has to do a lot with productivity and driving the productivity of people around the globe. And again, in this room, all the people online today, when we all start working and we can be productive, the level of productivity is greater, even with this small organization, than most companies, most large companies can bring to bear on any specific topic. So keep that in mind when we talk about shaping things. It's shaping it because of the large reach we have already. Of course, Ory solves problems that all cloud developers have, and in order to solve those problems, we built out a bigger network infrastructure. I'm going to go into that in a minute. And this network infrastructure is designed to add the value that you need as a company, as a product company in particular, to drive not only securing your application, but then using your application to do more than you would be able to by doing it yourself. So we have the ingredients, we have the cloud infrastructure, the network, and then we have, of course, the people and the intellectual property that we have in this company. It's not source code. It's people that know a lot about what to do when you have authorization implemented. You know, authorization doesn't solve anything by itself, but it gives you an opportunity to solve bigger problems that you can use in conjunction with it. Last but not least, I know a lot of you we're going to talk about this today. A lot of the projects and products are now being named differently because we're trying to get all of the ecosystem aligned with a few new concepts that we're introducing. So as you go through the day, please be patient and think about the naming conventions, not only because of the past history we have with those names, but also the future, what we want to achieve. So everything Ory is now under one brand and one legal infrastructure. So that was one of the things we established this year. Sorry about that. So I talked about developers, and what are some of the things developers really focus on in our experience this year? I should say speed is, of course, an important factor, but it's probably the important factor for most developers. In other words, speed matters. And if you can take today open source software, it's not just about the software anymore. It's about bringing the software together with a deployment infrastructure, a CI/CD tool chain that makes it faster when you go and look at the software and you want to test the software or use the software. So being fast is extremely important. Ory is completely aligned with this goal, and I think we sacrifice a lot of things to be fast, but those sacrifices are made to advantage developers and not disadvantage their security. So as we talk about security and speed, these are two things that very closely align in Ory. One of the trends that happened in 2021 and 22 is that open source projects became very linked to this deployment infrastructure. And that's not only because of speed and security, it's also about convenience. So if you look at some of the other leading projects, Supabase, Next.js, and Vercel, and Ory, so a lot of these efforts have been to align very closely the build part of the software chain with the deployment part of the software chain and create one unified experience so many developers can use Ory and the software in a better way. Now, in order to do that, we need a managed, scalable infrastructure that we run on a global network scale. I'll go into that in a minute. But this is something that I think now is more or less a de facto configuration for almost all open source software projects in the world. In other words, if you can use the software to build something, you want to have the ability to deploy it right away. Now, with around about 400 million Docker pulls, I think Ory is getting to the point where we've become a very, let's say, accepted standard in the world of deployment. In other words, we started off with Docker. We use Docker still today a lot. A lot of the questions we get are about these deployment infrastructures. The good thing about that is customers want to try it quickly and use it and see how it works, and we have a lot of examples and code around that. And we're trying to move that as much as we can to a managed infrastructure that we build so we can advantage those developers and give them further information about running things. So data observability, what do you do when you have authentication, authorization, et cetera, implemented? Then you actually start to collect data and look at problems that can be solved by having these things in place. Ory also stands for fairness, not only in dealing with people, but also pricing. We want to be compliant with a lot of the global regulations around data and data privacy. A lot of these scenarios come up in day-to-day work at Ory, where we look at helping companies not only implement cloud security, but then what happens when you're done? What do you start on day one? You look at then auditing, compliance, risk management, all of the data around the security, devices, session management, et cetera, all of these things that you need to do. Ory does that for you now. How do we do it? We have now Ory Cloud, which is now called Ory Network. I'm not sure when that's going to be implemented, but sometime very soon. The naming convention, and also Ory.net, which is really our way of taking the ingredients that we worked with most of you on and putting them in an environment where you can use it on a database. It's still open source, it's still the same software we use and you use in your projects. We have a couple things in Ory Network that are not open source. Those are mostly security driven, but we do have some things that are very, I think, special. And one of the most special ones is this low latency programmed infrastructure that's designed to give you a low friction user onboarding to manage that user, his subscription, his contract, his profile, and give you all of the data around that user's experience so that you as a company can then begin to manage not only the user experience, but also the way the data is surfaced and manage that over time. Now, why would you want to manage that? You might have security issues. You might be a product manager and you see, well, the Apple iPhone doesn't work that well in Romania, so why don't we use a different type of device? Or you might see that users forget their passwords a lot in Spain and you want to implement a password. So you have a lot of optionality, and when you want to have that optionality, you need the data to back up your decisions, and that's what this network is all about. So massive network infrastructure. We predict around 100 million simultaneous users on our network in 2023. That's a big number, but we think also this is driven by a lot of not only individuals and individual users, but smaller projects and large customers across the globe. Combining four things, really: identity, permission, we'll go into all of these this week, access, and zero trust. And zero trust is something that is not only a security model, I think it's a best practice in the meantime for most companies. I'm going to skip this just for time reasons, but I'll just tell you. So most of the things we talked about: simple login, frictionless, making it easy for users. We're announcing something today that will affect about 15 million JavaScript programmers across the globe. It's a no-code, easy way to launch this whole cloud security infrastructure for your company. Again, within 2 or 3 minutes, you're up and running with a very professionalized infrastructure. We have a lot of data that we're going to be talking about today: threat management, threat monitoring, sharing that information with some of the bigger global security infrastructures at big companies. And of course, we want to provide access to all this critical data in a way that makes it easier for your company to use the information to make decisions. This is a Star Trek force field, by the way. And one of the things that we believe is that the internet needs a force field. In other words, we're building this network infrastructure around the globe to make it harder to penetrate the core applications in the internet, because once you go through Ory, you have to do a lot of the basic security infrastructure challenges that any one company would not be able to do by itself. So this is a very big part of how we see it. Of course, we're not going to talk about ML, AI right now, because we will have some talks about that, but getting the data in a place where you can then start to use the big innovations of this generation to extract information and look at patterns and understand where the security threats are, those are things that are very important. Not only there, but a lot of people and a lot of companies want to help their customers. Customers are threatened by data loss and identity loss every day, and this is something that these technologies will be able to help us with. This whole event is being held because of our users, our community, but we will talk a lot today about also the commercialization of Ory and how we're going about that. And I think there's a lot of exciting things that you'll see and hear today. So thank you for being here. Thank you for making it here in person. And of course, thank everyone online for participating today.